Fox News alert, we are awaiting President Trump's remarks at the National Rifle Association's annual convention that is going on in Dallas. As the president is once again stepping into the national debate over gun rights, we are going to bring you that speech live just as soon as it happens. But now back to our top story. President Trump insisting that he'd love to speak with special counsel Robert Mueller and that he'd override his lawyers if he thought the interview would be fair. The president also appearing to walk back Rudy Giuliani's comments about the Stormy Daniels payment, saying Giuliani just started on his legal team and needs to, quote, get his facts straight. Let's bring in our power panel. Jake McAbee, former chief speechwriter for Attorney General Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, and Kristin Tate, contributor for The Hill and author of the book, How Do I Tax Thee? I like that.
Thank you.
You know, he's not the only one that thinks that the Mueller probe has gone astray and is not a fair deal. We know that the federal judge right now in Mr. Manafort's trial has been making news here in the past hour saying you don't really care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud, that they're interested in Manafort because of his potential to provide material that would lead to Trump's prosecution or impeachment. Are you surprised to hear a judge come out and say this?
Well, that's a little bit further afield, but I think what we're talking about now is whether the president should speak to the special counsel. And there are sort of two answers to that, and one is the right answer, and the other is the smart answer. And the right answer is absolutely he should. 5 of his associates have already pleaded guilty to federal crimes, and he owes the American people a full accounting of what he knew and when he knew it. Now, the smart answer is absolutely not. The president is a person who can't seem to keep a story straight from one day to the next. We saw that with Stormy Daniels just yesterday and today. And so I would imagine that no defense attorney would ever let him within 10 feet of a competent prosecutor, not because they don't trust the special counsel, but because they don't trust the president. And I suspect that's what's going on.
Well, earlier this week, though, Giuliani did lay out some conditions that would need to be in place for a potential Trump-Mueller interview that were pretty reasonable. And if Trump didn't collude with Russia, and it doesn't appear he did, he has nothing to hide. But here's the problem. This investigation is not about collusion. This has become a bloodless coup organized by partisan hacks under Mueller to try and take Trump down. And that was made clear with the leaking of those questions that Mueller wanted to ask Trump, which weren't really focused on collusions, but rather these sort of dubious claims of obstruction of justice.
By the way, a third of it was focused on collusion. So it's not quite right to say that none of it was.
But Jake, I mean, that is exactly what the federal judge said, that is what this investigation has turned out to be. And he said basically that the Mueller team is lying. They were lying when they said that they were just going after Russia, and they've gone afield of that. So it's not just, you know, sort of a partisan back and forth. Now you have a federal judge saying that.
Well, there are two different pieces, first of all, of the Manafort case that's in the federal courts, and the one that we're talking about, that you're talking about, the judge was questioning sort of how we got from the larger Russian investigation here.
None of this information has to do with information related to Russian government coordination and the campaign of Donald Trump. That's what he's talking about in the Mueller probe.
But the point, I mean, that case is really about connections between Paul Manafort and the Russians.
But he's talking specifically about the council and what they're doing. So he's not the only one that's saying that the council has gone off on a tangent into another area that they have no right to be.
That's a case about sort of what jurisdiction the special counsel has, and that'll keep going. That's sort of an administrative consideration. It's important, but it'll go on. This is more about whether the president of the United States ends up talking to the special prosecutor, which Bill Clinton did back when he was under investigation, and which this president should, if he in fact has nothing to fear.
You already said that, but Kristin, you know, now you have it's gotten to be so divided. They're heading down this track now, and then you have the president coming out and saying things, and Rudy Giuliani saying things and really muddying the waters further. And that was not a step forward today.
No, it wasn't. I still think Trump trusts Giuliani. He's one of his best foot soldiers in the swamp. But look, Giuliani just started a few days ago. These guys need to sit down, get on the same page, and get their facts straight before anyone addresses the press. But to Jake's point, the American people know exactly what's going on. This investigation has become an unlimited fishing expedition. How many more tens of millions of taxpayer dollars do we need to spend on this? It's been a year now. We still don't have any evidence of Russian collusion. I think most people in this country see what's going on, and they're starting to roll their eyes.
We have 5 guilty pleas. It's not nothing.
We'll come back in a bit with more.
Press, just like NBC and ABC yesterday covered the story wrong.
President Trump slamming NBC News after it was forced to issue a correction to its bombshell report claiming the feds wiretapped the phones of President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, and intercepted at least one call with the White House. But NBC later walking it back, reporting that the calls were being logged, not listened to, which is a big difference. ABC News also issuing a correction. Let's bring in back our power panel, Jake Maccabee and Kristin Tate. Kristin, what do you think about this story? You think there's any possibility in your mind that they were right the first time around?
I mean, I just think this is a shocking example of irresponsible journalism. The reporters at NBC have become careless in their efforts to smear President Trump. You see these media outlets acting more like political organizations than news organizations, and this is why the people do not trust the mainstream media today. And I think that the more careless these outlets become and the more fake stories they publish, the less influence they have. I mean, NBC, the New York Times, CNN, they're not changing anyone's minds anymore. They're just playing to a smaller sliver of the far left at this point.
There was a lot of irony in the fact that he was making this comment and saying fake news and that sort of thing in the same breath that he seemed to be correcting what Rudy Giuliani said. So it does kind of feel like we've gotten to a time where you see somebody say something and then you're like, okay, let me wait, and then we'll see if it turns out it was true or not. That's not a great commentary on what's going on.
It's not. And look, the president has a lot of chutzpah talking about fake news when he himself has made more than 3,000 false comments since he began his presidency. And you just had Neil Cavuto at Fox yesterday talking about just some of the president's lies and saying, how can you drain the swamp when you're the one muddying the waters? So it's true. It's not a great look for him to try to push this story. Now, having said that, absolutely, NBC made a mistake. They're embarrassed. And they should be. And they issued a correction, which is what you should do in a situation like this. Now, the difference is NBC issued a correction and apologized for their false story or for their incorrect story, and the president hasn't apologized for any of his.
Jake, if an outlet ran a fake story on President Obama like this when he were in office, you and the other Democrats would be howling over this. While the mainstream media is busying themselves trying to take Trump down, though, the American people are happy with the job he's doing. A Rasmussen poll came out today. 51% approval rating. He's killing it on the economy. We've seen historic progress on North Korea, and he's rolled back burdensome regulations on businesses. I mean, overall, this presidency has been going pretty well.
When the American people have had a chance to make these decisions in special elections around the country, Democrats have performed about 11 or 12 points better than they normally would in the districts they're in. So when they have a chance to render some judgment on the progress of this administration, their judgment is it's not going so hot.
But they're really playing into his hands by when you put out a story and he screams fake news and you have to retract them. I mean, it does end up being, one of those things that he holds up for a long period of time afterwards. So you would think that people would be more concerned and careful to not fall into that trap.
I think that's true, and I think that NBC is justifiably embarrassed, and that's why you issue, a change and an apology, which is what they did. I mean, beyond that, there's not a whole lot more they can do except to be really rigorous, which is what they've done the rest of the time. Particularly in the past, we've seen this even in the last week, where there have been various reports from news outlets. The president has denied the news that they're putting out, and then all of a sudden they turn out to be right, as you're saying. So they've been pretty rigorous.
That is one of the things that has happened, though. We've seen these stories be untrue in the moment, and then way later down the road, it turns out that there was a kernel of truth in them somewhere along the way, or it was true, and somebody has been covering up or denying and saying, no, that's not the case. It leaves the public scratching their head and trying to figure out who you can trust, and more polarized than ever before.
It's very sad. We've gotten to a point in this country where you don't know if what you're reading is true. But if there's one thing we can say about the election, it's that it's highlighted this problem in the media, and I think that's an important discussion for us to have. The media has become so flagrant in its bias, and it's really exposed a lot of these journalists for who they really
that's
are.
Simply not true. That's simply not true, especially because there is one story that we can point to where we're talking. That's why we're talking about this. Is that
95% of coverage from NBC and CNN during Trump's first year was negative.
Okay.
How can
he did a lot of terrible things. There's a lot to cover. There's Stormy Daniels. There are all the problems with campaign finance.
All right, we're out of control. We got to go. Thanks.